Thank you, and welcome to everybody for joining today. This month's Women of Burlington series, which has just been so inspirational and emotional, and we've got another great show for you planned today. We are highlighting 3 inspiring Indigenous women in our community. When we started this series, we saw it as an opportunity to amplify local voices, talk about supporting each other as women, and to start conversations with women from all walks of life who have chosen, as we all have, to call Burlington home. Many of us, like myself, were not born here. We have chosen this as our home. So I'm really happy to introduce our 3 panelists today, and feel free to give a wave. Amber Ruthart, Isabel Blackbird McMurrich, and Reilly Goldsmith, and I'll formally introduce them a little bit later in the program. But before we start, I did want to address the recent news of the finding of 751 unmarked graves at the Marival Indian Residential School on the Cowessess First Nations. To the families of those children and to the entire Indigenous community, words can't begin to describe the sadness that I felt, and I know everybody in our community, but especially Indigenous members of our community who have had some experience with this through their families. My thoughts are with you, and the City of Burlington's thoughts are with all of you. And really, what a month it has been. I can't imagine the pain that people have been going through, reliving memories or personal experiences of being an Indigenous person in Canada. And it's National Indigenous History Month, right? To have this happen this month is just shows us how much more work and education and action we need to take. So as Canadians, we need to recognize the mistreatment of Indigenous people through racist government policies throughout our legacy. We have to acknowledge that. We have to take steps to change that and continue our journey of reconciliation. It is really only with a full understanding of the truth of what has happened that we can move forward to meaningful reconciliation. So I want to start now with a land acknowledgement. And Burlington does these in our committee and council meetings as well as all formal events. So I will be doing it at all of these speaker series as well. Burlington, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of the many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Haudenosaunee and the Métis, our lands spanning from Lake Ontario to the Niagara Escarpment are steeped in Indigenous history. The territory is mutually covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy, the Ojibwe, and other allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is part of the treaty lands of the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. So I want to pause there as well and turn it over to Amber Ruthart to talk about sweetgrass and setting our minds and hearts and intentions for the rest of our time together. Go ahead, Amber.
Thank you very much. I just realized that my name says Miss Amber Music, but it's actually Amber Ruthart. I forgot to change that. My apologies. So the sweetgrass is sacred medicine to Indigenous people. It's grown in the wild, so you can grow it in your own gardens. Sweetgrass is not cut with a knife. And it's very fragile. So one blade of sweetgrass can be easily broken. But when you take many strands of sweetgrass and you braid it together, it's very tight, and together and united these strands are. It's very strong. So that's sacred spiritual medicine right here, the sweetgrass. Once it's burnt, it's for purifying, well-intentioned. So when you burn sage, it clears the air. And when you burn sweetgrass, it brings in positive intentions. And that's the story of our sweetgrass. Oh, also, sometimes when people speak, they hold a sweetgrass or, an eagle feather just to remember the intentions in what they're speaking on.
Thank you so much for educating us about that and for setting our intentions for today. So I do now want to formally introduce the three amazing panelists that we have today. First, we have our local artist, Amber Ruthart.
Don't worry.
I'm messing it up as well, who's also an amazing singer, I have just discovered. Thus, your handle has an incredible voice. Among other things, Amber is an active member of our community who has put together incredible art installations like the most recent Hope for Healing in Spencer Smith Park and the Promenade of Pain Red Dress installation in Spencer Smith Park last year. And that was done in partnership with our public art program here at the City of Burlington. And she is also a professional vocalist and instructor, a mother of 5. And I know Julie's on the call, giving you a run for your money there, Julie, and is from the White Bear First Nations Treaty Number 4. Thank you so much for joining us today, Amber. We also have Isabel Blackbird McMurrich, a mother of 2 and a lifelong Halton resident who has witnessed the aftermath and trauma of the residential school system through her family members. Isabel is half Ojibwe and half German, so we share that in common. My mom's side of the family is German, and Isabel wants to be a voice to help point Canadians to resources to educate them about Indigenous culture, and certainly we are going to be talking about where people can find resources today on the show. So thank you so much for joining us, Isabel. And finally, we have Reilly Goldsmith. Reilly is the current Director of Programs and Operations for the Gord, Downie, and Chanie Wenjack Fund, which aims to improve the lives of Indigenous people through awareness, education, and connection. Her work centers around developing communications and programming so people across the country can learn about the true history of residential schools and Indigenous people. Reilly is a member of the Lac Seul First Nation and has 2 young children. So thank you, Reilly, so much for joining us today. I'm really thrilled to have you all here. And I think we'll start with just asking each of you to tell us a little bit about your story and how you got here, and Reilly, in particular, for those who may not know about the Chanie Wenjack Foundation, a little bit about that too. So we're going to start with Amber, and then we'll go to Isabel, and then Reilly, and we'll change up the order every time just to keep it interesting. So go ahead, Amber.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to first introduce myself in Cree. So, Ehau Ekwa Niahawe Watan. It says, now let's speak Cree. Tawau, Pictowe, Amber Nitsiketson, Kakishiwe, Kakawe, Oma Nia Niwihoin, White Bear First Nations Ochinia, Red Deer Eki Nitawakian, Nimiwitan Epewapmitin. That's basically just my introductions in Cree, and as I'm reclaiming my culture, I'm learning how to speak Cree from a language keeper out in the Pacific. Her name is Kokum Dorothy, and she is an amazing elder. So about my story, I just want to make sure that everyone understands too that there's so many stories. Everyone has a story. Coming here, I was born in Red Deer, Alberta, and I was brought to Burlington. I lived here my whole entire life. So I consider myself urban Indigenous, not from the reserve. And what I mean is, like, because I was adopted, I was kind of put into more of a displacement, and I'm always trying to figure out, what I can do to reconnect to my culture. I was blessed to be put in a family, obviously, that gave me so many opportunities to take singing lessons. And I've always tried to reclaim myself through singing, so putting on benefit concerts, helping foster children. But it wasn't until I've finished having my 5 kids when I finally, realized the depth of Indigenous challenges. And I named my daughter, my 5th child, she's a girl, I named her Raven. And that's when, after the pandemic hit, I led a little march June 21st down from the bottom of the compass up to City Hall. And it was for murder missing Indigenous women. And that's also what my medallion is here. This is an Indigenous woman, and she has the red hand on her face, and that's symbolic of the women who can't speak, the women that we can speak for and are looking for. And that also inspired the art installation Promenade of Pain, which was last October, if you're reminding us of Ms. Mayor. A lot of people came and spoke to me. I sat with many people, and it was very interesting to hear their stories as well. And I sat with people that were from the reserve, and I was able to make those connections. And to me, that was great. That was huge, because being adopted from an Indigenous family and being raised Dutch, it's a challenge. It's a great challenge. And that's my story. I do a lot of art to heal. And that's where Hope for Healing came from, which was recently, I think last weekend. This month has been a little bit of a blur for me because so much has happened. But that was the Hope for Healing that was put out there for everyone to heal from as well, because it became more of a community art piece rather than just my own healing. And the strawberry is, the symbol of healing. In Ojibwe, I believe the word Ode means heart. And the shoes placed on the strawberry are representation of the generations in the future, hope for healing now, that the generations in the future, won't necessarily have to go through so much systemic racism as, we experience, even lateral racism as well. So, that's a little bit of my story and a little bit of the work that I've done. I guess I'll pass it on to someone else.
Thanks, Amber. Coming to you now, Isabel. Go ahead.
Okay, so very similar, some similarities to Amber. And so my family as well, I'm an urban Indigenous, and this word has just come into my life. So to me, it's actually very shaming. But so I'm half Native. My dad, born and raised from Walpole Island First Nation, which is about 2.5 hours from here, near Chatham and Kent. He went to a residential school. Unfortunately, I didn't actually learn of this trauma until my dad passed away about 3 years ago. And at that point, that is when my older brothers and sisters had told me that my dad went to the grave knowing this. So he chose, after that trauma that had happened to him, to raise my older siblings and us. So there's 9 of us kids. It's 2 different families, but we were always raised that we're brothers and sisters. And so my older siblings, they were raised in Oakville as well. My dad and his partner were hoping that we would escape the trauma, and the trauma followed them. 2 of my older siblings had attended an Indian boarding school, and 3 older ones had actually been taken into foster care, so similar to Amber's case. And my dad fought so hard for many years to get my older siblings back. In the meanwhile, he had met my mom and started another family. Together, he finally got all of us together. Growing up off reserve, it's very interesting to look back and reflect. As a child, I didn't know. I actually was raised to be white, to be Caucasian. If anyone asked, you don't talk about it. It's just you're white. And so I think that was just surreal. But now again, reflecting on all of our, the genocide against Indigenous people, it makes sense that my dad chose to raise us off reserve. And it makes sense that he chose to raise us this way. He wanted equal opportunities for us and to live a raceless life. I can only imagine the obstacles that he would have went through working at the company that he worked at. And then in terms of us, it's one of those where we have definitely been stripped. So my dad not only was stripped from the potential of learning our heritage and culture, my older siblings were stripped from it, and then I was as well. And the real realization for me on Indigenous Month, this month, as awful as it is, but it's a turning point for me that I was the first generation out of my family that wasn't brought up in these awful, traumatic ways. We were very poor, having 9 children. There were often times where, Child Protective Services was at our house. We didn't have running water all the time. We didn't have hydro all the time. I remember our grocery store was the food bank. Our Christmas gifts came from Salvation Army. So at the end of the day, what my parents did teach me was love, and love conquers all. And in the end, my dad made the right choices. He has very, 9 successful children who he should be so proud of, and my mother as well. And, a couple of my older siblings have moved back to the reservation that we're from. And then the rest of us were still off reserve. The one unfortunate part that I have seen as being Native off reserve is that I'm having so much trouble learning about my true culture. And so that's the one thing that I want to be able to bring to all Canadians, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, is the real beauty of our culture. And, looking at Amber and everything that you have already started to bring to Burlington, the city of Burlington, I want that amplified way more. So I thank you for allowing me to be a part of this panel, and I look forward to seeing all the work that all of Burlingtonians can do to make this shift.
Thank you so much, Isabel, and thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing your personal stories and how difficult that must have been. When you said that trauma, people tried to leave trauma geographically, but it followed them, right? The message that unless it's dealt with, trauma will follow all of us. And to hear the fact that you weren't even aware of your own history is just heartbreaking. And so glad that you are here.
And I think the one turning point for us, and it was so interesting, and I forgot to mention this, but my grade 5 teacher, I went to a very small school in Milton, Percy Mary, and my teacher was Miss Brenda Dolling, and she had found out that I was half Native, and we were just about to do our Aboriginal studies, and she had asked my dad if we could bring in some of our items from home. So that was really cool, because then I got to actually find out that we were Native, which is so bizarre. 12 years old finding us out, and I got to go to my older brothers and sisters' houses and get some of their items. So my teacher had decorated our full classroom in our flags and our dream catchers, everything. She even went, I don't know how she would have done this at the time, but had set up, there was a teepee with a fire burning in it, I recall, and then there was rawhide, and each of my classmates, we had to take a rock and water, and we were hitting this rawhide to make blankets. And then we had also made beading looms, which was such a hands-on experience. It was 3 pieces of wood and some nails. And we started making, different beading necklaces, earrings, bracelets. And it again, I think that was a huge part which started to turn my dad, that it was okay to tell people. And there were lots of fights to get, our Indian status cards and our band cards and so on. But that I would say that, Canadians as people, we've moved so far in the last 35 to 40 years, but there's still so much work that definitely needs to be done.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It just shows the importance of what one person can do, right? That one teacher opened up a whole new world. And I know we've talked, and we will on this panel talk about the importance of education generally, but literally in the classroom, that's just incredible what doors that opened for you and your family, and for us, by extension, for our whole community. Over to you, Reilly, to talk to us about your journey and also a little bit about the fund. Go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you. And hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. Amber and Isabel, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I feel like we've kind of uncovered a little bit of a theme here, because I myself am also have considered myself to be an urban Indigenous person. I am a member of Lac Seul First Nation, but I was born and raised in Thunder Bay, off reserve. And similarly, my family, we grew up not close to our culture, and that was an intentional decision that was made by my grandparents for their own reasons. And so, you know, my mother and my aunt didn't grow up incredibly close to their culture, and so by extension, we did not either. I think my mom's actually on the call right now, so hi, Mom. But it's something that we've, you know, learned, and we've slowly over the years have reconnected in our own ways with our culture. You know, my mother has always worked in Indigenous organizations, and she got me started working in Indigenous organizations from a very young age. I started working in child welfare and youth mental health, and eventually kind of pivoted over to the other side of nonprofit work, and now am working closely in development and program development, and, you know, the communications piece through the Gord, Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund. And so I guess personally, my journey coming to the fund is I've been here. I came on in 2018. We're a relatively new organization. We received charitable status in 2018, and I came on shortly thereafter. And I found that it was such a perfect convergence of my own journey, and what the fund is trying to do is really just create a conversation, a national conversation that people haven't been having for years. You know, we hear from, you know, urban Indigenous people, we hear from people who have had these connections with these stories, and we hear from the survivors and attendees for years and years and years. But, you know, for most non-Indigenous people, these stories haven't been commonplace. With the emergence of the news out of Kamloops and the news out of Saskatchewan, it's very shocking for a lot of people, because this hasn't been part of their regular repertoire. And that's part of what our work is focused around doing, is, you know, breaking down those barriers and making sure that all people in Canada are participating in this conversation, actively taking part in reconciliation. And it starts with building awareness and education around that, so that people can act and can actively work towards this together. And so I'm very proud of being able to, you know, personally be able to uncover and kind of reclaim a bit of my cultural identity that we didn't grow up with through this work, and also be able to be, you know, side by side with a lot of other people who are also learning this journey for the first time. So yeah, that's my story in a nutshell, I should say.
That's great. Thank you. And I think the story of Chanie Wenjack, he was at a residential school and ran away and died on the journey home.
Yes. Yeah. So I can give a little brief background on that. So yes, you're absolutely right. Chanie Wenjack was a 12-year-old Indigenous boy. He went to school when he was 9 years old. He was taken to the school when he was 9 years old, and him, along with a few other boys, had tried to escape. He was the only one that made it away from the school, and he was trying to travel 600 kilometers back to his home. All he had in his pocket was a map that he couldn't fully read because it was in English, and a little jar full of matches. And he followed the train tracks as far as he could, and unfortunately, he was found beside the train tracks, and he had died before he made it home. And so his story is not an incredibly unique story when it comes to the 150,000 children that attended residential schools and tried to escape. And his story was one that stuck with Gord Downie And it was one of those things that plagued him for years, because he was like, how did I not know this? He learned about this story, and he considered himself to be, this Canadian, this proud Canadian who knew our stories and knew our country. And he came across all of this later in life, and he was just moved by it and created a number of poems that turned into a graphic novel, which turned into what we now know as The Secret Path. And we've used that as a way to be able to share the stories of residential schools with people all across Canada. And we've developed a number of programs around that, and it's evolved into what we now know as our Legacy Schools program and Legacy Spaces. And so it's a conversation starter, really is what it is, as a way to thoughtfully introduce this whole concept to young people mainly, but it was also a perfect opportunity for these two families, the Wenjack and the Downie family, to come together and actually have a solution to put forward to Canadians to say, this isn't a hopeless situation. This is something that we can all participate in and learn about and work together, so that we are all coming together on the path towards reconciliation.
Thank you so much for that. And, I recall I didn't know a lot about the residential school system myself until my early 20s. It was as a journalist. My first job out of journalism school was at a national religious magazine. And at the time, and that was 1989. So there were still another almost 10 years before the last school was closed. And the various denominations, and most of the Christian denominations ran some form of schools, Protestants, Catholics, all of them. And they were all grappling with, some of them had closed, but they were all grappling with what the stories that were coming out even back then. And this was before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I remember covering that as a young journalist, and just thinking, how did I not know this before? And watching the debate really about whether they did any good or not. And I think we now know the lasting legacy of cultural genocide and death. And so let's talk about that. We just learned this month about the discovery of a grave unmarked of 215 children in Kamloops, followed by another discovery of a grave of 251 in Saskatchewan. We've seen calls for the removal of Sir John A. Macdonald's statue, representative of Canada, and the racist policies that really have plagued our country since its very foundations. And also more recently, calls to remove Ryerson's name from buildings and educational facilities as the architect of the residential school system. And of course, you're probably aware, most of you, that the Halton District School Board has recently voted to rename Ryerson Public School here in Burlington, sent me a letter around the park, which is adjacent, also named Ryerson. That's a city park. So next week at committee, we will be discussing embarking upon a renaming of that. So I wanted to turn it first to you, Isabel, and then we'll go to Reilly and then Amber for just your thoughts on what this past month has been like, and what we do with all of this that we're now faced with collectively as a community. What would you like to see come out of all this, heart-wrenching pain and revelation? How can we move forward together? And anything else that you want to share about that? Go ahead.
I would say this month has just been, I'm speechless. This month has just been eye-opening for so many non-Aboriginal people, which I'm grateful for. As sad as it is, our trauma that our ancestors and that our families have all gone under, we have been trying to tell these stories for years and years and years, and nobody has listened. So I'm grateful, as bad as it is, that these babies were found, and that we're now having open conversations. The saddest part that I always find in my heritage is that we're such a small percentage of Canadian population that our voices are often not heard. We're very humble, we're respectful people, and we're not violent. And then it's the media that portrays, when we have our land claims and so on, the media takes it and portrays us in a certain way. Unfortunately, in order to get our voices heard, there is violence that has to happen. So I'm grateful that now we're able to open up conversations and have non-Aboriginal, all Canadians learn about our true history, and just to open up these doors. And what more can we all do to help our Indigenous and bring back our beautiful culture? Everyone, I don't want us to all know the trauma, but there's so much beauty to our culture as well. And I would love to invite and have others open and come and see it all.
Thank you. Reilly, over to you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like for years and years, Indigenous people didn't have a place in, our broader society like that. At one point in our history, it was considered illegal for too many Indigenous people to even congregate in these areas where these statues would be up, right? So of course, that wouldn't have even factored into the conversation about whether, having a statue of John A. Macdonald or having statues of Egerton Ryerson anywhere would have been problematic, because they weren't part of that conversation for even having them there in the first place. So I think removing a lot of these names and taking another look at it forces people to look at the history and see why these things are problematic. And I was actually having a conversation with my husband a little while ago about this, and how I'm actually really proud that a lot of people in Canada aren't actually pushing back about this. You don't see what you saw in the States when things were happening with the Confederate statues in after George Floyd. You're seeing some more people in Canada that are actually taking stock of why these steps are necessary and trying to at least uncover a little bit the reasons why. Maybe I'm missing it a little bit, but I don't see that there's that same kind of pushback. And I think that's a really hopeful step. But I think it has to also go a step beyond that too, and actually include the Indigenous community in those conversations and in those discussions to see how we can make these more inclusive. How can we engage in Indigenous placemaking to create these centers and to create these areas that are reflective of the communities that are around us as well, right? So I think it's an amazing first step for us to take to actually take stock of why these historical statues and emblems exist today still, but let's also take it a step further and use it as an opportunity to be more equitable and to engage all those voices that have been forgotten about for years.
That's a great point. Amber, to you.
Okay. All right. So I'm a pacifist. I don't deal with violence. I deal with art installations, and a lot of what I try to say comes through that. A lot of us Indigenous people are artists, and our words come through our beadwork, sacred beadwork. It comes through music. That's how people's voices are heard. It's not heard enough yet. In regards to all the statues, those are people. Right now, the Indigenous community is frustrated, and it's very angry. And taking out on those statues is a way that some people find relief. Some people are processing it. So in a way, it's their form of art. I believe that, we can change the narrative of history by teaching appropriate history, proper history. Sir John A. Macdonald, yes, he did do all these things for Canada. He did the Confederate, all that stuff. Love my lack of beautiful words. But he also did wrong to the Indigenous people. Horrific wrong. you know, and him with Louis Riel as well, you know, having Louis Riel being killed, like all of the history. There's an opera actually about Louis Riel, and the COC, Canadian Opera Company, put it on. And it was very unfortunate because when I took my son to see it, because we're opera goers, and I took my son to see it, but the individual who was Indigenous was supposed to be performing that night. This beautiful Indigenous piece actually couldn't appear because he experienced racism towards being Indigenous. He couldn't perform that night because it was so traumatic to him. And, you know, that story of Louis Riel could be told more as well. Like, I don't know if anyone really has learned about that in school, or if that's high school or whatever. You know, these are stories, and we just have to change the narrative. Christopher and Columbus didn't discover America. We were here. You know, we were here. So, yeah, people are really, you know, they're changing the narrative of history, and even if that means taking down statues, that's art to me. That's art.
It's a really, really important observation that, and I've never thought of it as art. So thank you for that, Amber, and showing us what that looks like through an artist's eyes. That, you know, telling the truthful story, the full story, and not, you know, skipping over the difficult parts or leaving them out altogether. It's so important to tell the story from multiple perspectives. And I just saw in the chat somebody teaches about Louis Riel in their kindergarten class. So good for starting right there at the beginning of the educational journey. Before we turn it over to a couple of questions, let's pick up on that thread of education and where people can find out more. I know the people that are on this call, and I certainly have gotten it from many residents in the community. And Reilly, you touched on this, that there is an attitude that is different than what we might see in other places, where people are really hungering to learn and to see what they can do and how they can be part of the solution going forward. So I am going to start with you, Reilly, around what advice that you would have for people who want to learn more, educate themselves, and really, really importantly, what actions any individual person can take to be part of the healing journey that we are on as a country, starting with the truth and reconciliation, but but really slow. And I think people are saying enough is enough, and we need to move much more quickly on healing and people recognizing the truth of our histories, of our country's legacy. Go ahead, Reilly.
Yeah, so the Gord, Downie, Chanie, Wenjack Fund, this is what we do, right? We first recognize that before any sort of action or reconciliation can really take place, you have to understand what the issues are. You have to understand the history. And that all starts with education. So we have compiled a number of resources, and there's so many resources that exist. I think both Amber and Isabel had both touched on this, that these have been stories and things that have been talked about for years. So the very first place for people to start, if you're just hearing about reconciliation in residential schools for the first time now, or if it's been something that you've been learning about for years, there's so much to learn. There are so many different diverse communities with very different experiences and attitudes and opinions and traditions. And there's no end to the amount of resources that exist. So start by doing your research and educating yourself. We have a number of resources available on our website if you wanted to check it out. It's downiewenjack.ca. But there's the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. There's the inquiry into the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. There's Reconciliation Canada, sorry. There's a number of resources and stories. Start by, start locally if you want. Start learning about the organizations or the communities around you and start exposing yourself. The next step is really just trying to figure out how you can turn that into some conversation at your dinner table, or expanding it into action in your own day-to-day. We run a program called Legacy Schools, and it's a free education toolkit for any educator. So if there are any educators that are tuning in today and you want to learn more, I'm happy to talk to anybody about it, but it's chock full of free resources that have been compiled from people all across Canada, from K to 12, that talk about this and that provide really tangible ways of teaching it, but also turning that into action. And so through that program, we've been able to see a ton of amazing reconciliations that we call come out of that. We've had students who put together plays. We've had students who have organized art shows. We have an opportunity to bring Indigenous artists directly into the schools, obviously COVID notwithstanding, but we have that opportunity to be able to share those stories and bring them into students so that they can learn directly from Indigenous artists and directly from Indigenous leaders and engage with that content so that they can be the change makers and they can bring those conversations home. So there's so many different things that people can do, but my biggest thing would say, you have to start with learning what the issues are. Start from the beginning. If it seems overwhelming, it is. Indigenous people have been dealing with this for a really long time, but that doesn't have to stop people from acting. Little steps, little things make a huge, huge difference. I'll just say one more thing and then I can turn it over to the next person, but my husband's family is non-Indigenous, and I talk about this stuff a lot. I talk about it in my personal life all the time, and I'm constantly bringing these issues to them and constantly talking to them about it. And I think the most valuable thing that we can do is having those conversations directly with our family members. And it doesn't have to be in a scary way that, oh my God, we have to learn about this really traumatic history. You can share the beauty of it, and we should be sharing the beauty of the culture and the traditions. I brought Bannock to my family's house for the first time for a dinner, and I was able to share that piece with them. And that was something that I hadn't done in years, is cook Bannock. And I did it with my daughter after finding out about the 215 discovery. And, it was really healing, and it was very meaningful to me to be able to do that and to be able to share that part of it. So, start by just learning, having those conversations, and really tap into the resources that exist, because these stories have been shared for years and are begging for people to interact with it and to learn these stories.
Thank you so much. One of the fun things that was suggested to us by an Indigenous member of our community, Angela, and I know you're on the call, was a Bannock bake-off to teach us all about Bannock and what it is. And COVID kind of got in the way, COVID and timelines, but it's something that I know I really appreciated how you said learning the great parts of your culture and this many varied traditions, even starting with the way we did with the sweetgrass story from Amber. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Amber, to give us your thoughts on what people can do to learn and to act.
Okay, for sure. So I don't know if anyone really noticed, but my hair is in dreads. And that's actually, I shouldn't say the word dreads because that is a different terminology for another culture. But in the Cree Nation, as far as, you can look in pictures, my ancestors had what we call rolled hair, right? And so I have this rolled hair in honor of my ancestors. And Baby Jack, his name is, he had rolled hair. There's many chiefs that have had rolled hair as well. So, just learning. When I actually have someone come into my chair, because I do rolled hair on people as well, I tell them the stories of, I tell them my story. And I think that those are just a few ways to progress the stories and the healing and the reconciliation. It's just having conversations, because the Indigenous people the way we talk is not always written down in books. Like, it's oral, it's passed on from my understanding, and now it's your understanding. We pass the information on by word of mouth or by sharing fires. So, when I do like my art installations, I can have those intimate community speeches with people and talk with them. And, you know, that is one of the best ways of healing and reconciliation is, and getting, you know, that information out there. It's just engaging with community. Again, like it's a challenge right now for Indigenous people to be engaging with the community because, you know, we don't want people to profit off of our sacred understandings, as well as, you know, there's so much grief happening right now. So, you know, those who are speaking out and saying things, you know, we all have that feeling inside of us. I was challenged this weekend, and because Kawasas is actually 1 hour north of my reserve. So all the 751 found, they're my child ancestors. The people from my reserve went to Maryville. And, you know, getting the voices and the messages heard is very important, but, you know, you have to do so with, especially when you go talk to an Indigenous person, do so with much respect. Give them the tobacco, give them, you know, the respect that they deserve. Yeah. So for myself, finding ways for reconciliation, you know, it's good to do it through books. It's good to do it through the Albertan University. They have a free course. And yeah, just giving space, but, you know, keeping that understanding going. There's been a call to action through the city of Burlington to open up an Indigenous space for us, where we can heal as Indigenous people, and we can have those conversations. That sacred space to have conversations with the community, and starting in the grassroots. You know, starting in our city, right? And engaging others. You know, that's where things start. Sometimes it's just on the news, and it's, you know, oh, news is over. But if you speak to someone face to face and you share their space, that makes such an impact than just, you know, clicking off. Even APTN, right? We have our own news station. We've had this forever, you know. You can go back many, many years and watch APTN and see all the stories happen. But yeah, face to face is always the most important, in my opinion.
For that. Well, and the fact, you know, the art installations you're doing and other opportunities to actually start a conversation about what it means is really, really important. So, so thankful to you for initiating that. Isabel, over to you. Go ahead.
You know what? Most of it was already taken by these wonderful ladies. So definitely, yes, there's no reason that any Canadian shouldn't know our history and the truth. You know, we are all very fortunate that most of us do have access to the internet. I know on the reservations, it's a little bit different. Their virtual schooling was not like ours. So everyone, please keep that in mind as well. Anyway, so yes, educate yourself as much as you can. You know, social media is one of our places. As Amber and Reilly said, keep sharing the stories. So if your Indigenous friends are sharing stories, keep sharing them. That's the way that we're going to start to build more and more voices. As I said, you know, our population, we make up so little of the Canadian population. So how can you continue to help raise the awareness? And echoing off of Amber, right now, the community might seem that, you know, we're definitely grieving. We're going through so many different, each of our generations is going through so many different things right now that it might not be the right moment, but we're giving time for everyone to heal and this little quietness for everyone to educate themselves. And then together we will be calling on all Canadians to definitely help us and get our voices out there.
That's great. Thank you for that. Well, our board is lighting up with lots of questions. People are really interested in hearing your thoughts. So I know we have about 7 minutes left, so we'll try and do this in the time if you wish to answer these questions, because these are not easy questions. So I'm just going to tell you what there are 3 on the board here. I'm going to read all three, and you can answer all three or what you feel comfortable providing answers to. So the first one from Julie: I plan on spending Canada Day reflecting with my family. No barbecue, no fireworks. We have no interest in celebrating. What activities or suggestions do you have? So that's activities or suggestions for Canada Day. The second question is, this is from Heather, thank you. What would your recommendations be for the school and the park renaming? So the school's already made the decision to rename Ryerson. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions around that? And then the next from Nicole: are there initiatives in place to put pressure on Christian and public school boards to rewrite the history books and remove the whitewash narrative to make sure that we actually tell the true story? And we do have, I did see some comments about working with the Oakville Museum around local Indigenous space. Thank you, Julian, for that. And we do have, of course, Joseph Brent Museum. That could be a place for education resource. But I'm going to start, we'll come back to our original order here. Start with you, Amber. So thoughts on Canada Day, thoughts on renaming Ryerson, and the final one was thoughts on how to get the correct stories told. And Angela, I see you wanted to weigh in here. So we'll hear from our panelists, and then I'll give you the floor. Go ahead, Amber.
Okay, so for Canada Day, I was actually approached by Angela from the arts department to put up the art installation one more time downtown at Spencer Smith Park. So the Strawberry Hope for Healing will be revisited. So that will be happening on Canada Day from, I think, 10 till 6. It'll be up. So if people want a place to come and, process, that's what I'll be doing. For myself, I haven't celebrated Canada Day for a while. As a matter of fact, for the 150, I was down in Louisiana, floating down the bayou, far south as possible. But yeah, so the renaming of the school, I think that's, I don't have any suggestions right now, but that's a great opportunity for conversation. We can involve a lot of the people that, will come forward with the, in the urban Indigenous community to rename something in our city. And I hope that more Indigenous people will come forward because, we're looking for you. There are programs, that can be set up for us. And this is certainly something that, needs to be spoken about in our community. The renaming of the school and the park. And the last one, what was the last question again? Sorry.
How to be helpful in getting all school boards and anywhere else really to write the proper, truthful Canadian history rather than the whitewashed version.
I guess books. Read books. Have an Indigenous person come in. Have the words face-to-face contact. Because the truth is out there. It's just covered still. There's been TED Talks, there's been YouTube videos, there's children's songs. I'm myself, I'm writing a children's program to speak about, the 60s scoop and, my story, more child oriented, of course. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunities out there. So I'll pass it on to someone else.
Thanks, Amber. I'll turn to you, Isabel, and then Reilly. Go ahead.
So in terms of Canada Day, this is an interesting question for me, and I'm still on the fence as to how I'm personally going to be celebrating. It's similar to Amber, actually. We generally don't really celebrate Canada Day. I see there's fireworks in parks and so on, but I know in the Facebook groups and so on, a lot of people, and we appreciate it, are trying to find orange shirts to not wear the red this Canada Day. As long as you are taking a moment to really look at your true Canadian history, I think that you have done such a great job as a Canadian. Just reading through, and there's, the 94 calls to action. There's a child-friendly one as well. And we should still be proud to be Canadian. There's so many other things that this country has done for us. So as Indigenous, and this is my personal, that we should all still be proud. It's just, let's do a reflection and how can we work together to change our narrative to Canada in the future for the following generations after us. In terms of renaming the school, I think as well, it's a perfect opportunity for us all to gather and to actually figure out what it is that Burlington, what this could mean for Burlington. And I think that this is, again, another a stepping stone for us to come together and bring some more Aboriginal learning to Burlington. I think that it would be amazing. I had signed my daughter, she's 9 years old, prior to COVID, up for some cooking classes with our rec center at Tansley Woods. How cool would it be to make fry bread or corn soup or those types of things? And it could be other multiculturalism food as well. Or instead of, the basic art programs, I'm not finished this yet, but I did do a Zoom art the other night by an artist from Thunder Bay, and he was absolutely amazing. He taught the Zoom, and he was teaching us all through story, because that's what our culture, right? We're song, we're story, and that's our true culture. So how awesome would that be for us, again, to come together and bring this to Burlington, not only for our kids, but for us, right? My in-laws, they said, it's so sad that I don't know the truth, and I would love to be a part of this. How can I? And there's so many other Burlington people that are the exact same. And same with, I said, with the schooling and the loom. Is that something that we could work with the rec center, Parks and Recs, to start to build in some of these programs? So thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. And Reilly, over to you.
Candidate question is a very interesting one. I'm similar to Isabel, where I don't know where I stand with it just yet. We have traditionally celebrated it, and I know this year is going to look a lot different, and it's not going to be the same celebratory tone for a lot of people in Canada. And we actually had this question come up within my neighborhood as well. What do we do? And I think self-reflection is certainly the first, the best thing to do at this point, and educate yourself. I think I've said that a few times today. But I think it also just needs to go beyond that one day. It has to be a commitment that we're making time and time again to do better and to continue to learn and to recognize that this is part of Canadian history, and you have to take the good with the bad. And right now we're kind of in that, not so great part with Canada. And so I think we need to recognize that. And it's not going to be something that we're able to solve right away, but starting with Canada Day celebrations, if that's part of your personal journey, to reflect and to wear orange and to come out in for community or Indigenous-led events is an excellent way to do that. I think there's going to be a lot of Indigenous communities that are not doing any sort of community event or anything like that, just as a way for themselves to mourn, and that's okay too. I think we're just making sure we're giving space and taking the lead from Indigenous leaders and Indigenous community members and how they want to treat that. In terms of the renaming, how wonderful would it be to have a traditionally named building and park with some language that was once used in this area? I think that would be a really lovely way of renaming the school and the park. I don't have any real suggestions at this point, but I think that would be a really interesting way of approaching it. And then the last question around the resources, I think it's important that we hear from all perspectives. I don't think we're going to be able to do away with the history books anytime soon. I think it's a very, long and complicated process of rewriting curriculum and reestablishing what we're, mandating to be taught in schools. But I think teachers have the opportunity to bring in other resources themselves as well to make sure that those Indigenous voices are heard, and that there's, a wide range of, voices and ways that we're bringing education to our students, through oral traditions and things like artwork and music, beading, like all of those really hands-on experiences means so much to students at that age. And it's just such a strong way of being able to honor those cultures and the traditions and the history.
Thank you so much. Lots of great suggestions. We are almost out of time, but I did want to bring in Angela, who had a question. Can everyone on the panel stick around for another minute or two? And if you are watching and you have to jump off, thank you for joining us this long, and we'll wrap up shortly. Okay, over to you, Angela.
Hi, and thank you very much for the time. I just wanted to thank all of you lovely women for sharing, including you, Mayor. This is always wonderful. I think I'd just like to say that this is definitely a time for listening. As we've listened to your wonderful stories and ideas today, it is a time for us to listen. And I would encourage everybody to check into places like the Woodland Cultural Center, where you can listen to survivor stories. Of course, there's a survival circle with the National Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Lots of stories on YouTube. And it really is that time for us to listen and then take action. And Reilly, I'm wondering if you have any thing coming up with the Downie Wenjack Foundation where people have an opportunity to listen further?
Thank you. Thank you for that plug, Angela. On June 30th, we are partnering with 4 of the big major radio broadcasting companies and a number of independent radio stations to air 18 different Indigenous stories about the residential school system and their own personal journeys across Canada. So from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. on June 30th, tune into virtually any radio station. It'll be on about 500 different channels throughout the day on June 30th for a day to listen.
That's great. I've just written that down. So we are out of time, and I see lots more questions and requests for resources. So what we're going to commit to is once we post the video of this on my webpage, we will endeavor to get as many resources that we've been suggested, especially in the local ones. I know that's really a top of mind, and thank you for the question around what's available in North Halton. So we'll do a bit of digging and keep populating that as it comes in, and look to people on the call, as well as, of course, our panelists to help us make sure we have as comprehensive as possible a listing of resources. So with that, I want to give a huge thank you to Amber Ruthart, Reilly Goldsmith, and Isabel Blackbird McMurrich for taking time, sharing so personally and openly your story and your advice for us. This is a great conversation. I'm so happy that we were able to meet together, and it won't be the last conversation that we have. And I'm feeling, in the midst of all the incredible grief and trauma, I'm also feeling little glimmers of hope, because this has set us on a new course. And certainly in Burlington, it's an opportunity for us to learn and take further action, and lots of good advice around our virtual conversation today. So thank you so much. Thanks to all of you out there for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Madam Mayor, before we sign off, I was hoping I could possibly sing one quick song. If that's okay.
Absolutely. Please do.
This song is, it's a verse from Fawn Woods. She is an Indigenous performer here in Canada, and the song is called Remember Me. Remember me when the sun comes up in the morning sky, there I will be, soaring as the eagle so high, feeling free. Down the path, hand in hand, you and me. Thank you. Oh, you're muted, Miss Mayor.
I'm overcome. Thank you so much. That was beautiful, and we will actually get you on a show just to sing to us. I think that is just You are. You have an amazing voice, and the messages in the words and the songs that you choose are incredible. Thanks everyone again for being here, and we will do this again, and we will stay in touch around how we can continue to move forward our conversation and our actions. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.